Let us go on to the next topic, which is religious freedom. And our first question will again come from the screen. So roll the tape, please.
Hello, I am Carl Letzu, National Director of the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. Kenewa provides important support to Middle Eastern Christians and Eastern Catholics worldwide. Although you don't see it in the news often, Christians are facing violence around the world. During my travel to the Middle East, I've heard my share of disturbing stories from families that have experienced firsthand violence, fear, and hatred for the simple fact that they are Christian. This is why I stand here at the Good Shepherd Chaldean Catholic Parish in North York. Many families have come from Iraq and they are worried about their relative remaining in their homeland. They are among 327 million Christians for whom having their religious freedom violated by discrimination and persecution is a daily reality. Violence and persecution against any religious group is wrong. Yet Christians are the victim of 75% of the world's religiously motivated violence. In pure numbers, Christians are the most persecuted group in the world. Any violation of religious freedom, as you will agree, must be taken seriously. If elected, how would your party respond to the global problem of Christian persecution?
Thank you, Carl. Now again, the candidates have 1 minute to respond based on the randomly drawn order. And this time we're going to start with David Haskell from the People's Party.
Oh, thank you. In the spring of this year, I'm corroborating what we just heard. The British Foreign Office released a study on religious persecution. It found that Christians are the most persecuted group in the world. Christians in Muslim-majority countries fare the worst. In deference to current cultural prejudice against Christianity, most political leaders have turned a blind eye to the violent persecution of Christians that they're experiencing worldwide. A People's Party government will not continue this willful blindness. We have an explicit refugee policy that gives priority to the most persecuted minorities. And we will also protect the rights of Christians and other believers here at home. Our current Liberal government actively discriminates against Christians and people of conservative moral convictions. We saw it with the requirement to support abortion in writing to receive summer job funding. The People's Party is the only federal party with a policy to end that discrimination.
Next is Garnet. Garnet.
I move the motion in the House of Commons to repeal the values test. So maybe check our record on that. But on the point of religious freedom, my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. My wife's parents are Christians from Pakistan. So I would love to see this be a nonpartisan issue, but unfortunately, that is not the case here in Canada. Indeed, the Liberals eliminated Canada's Office of Religious Freedom, and it was only Conservatives who voted to leave that in place. Liberals particularly refused to recognize Christian persecution. They finally acknowledged the genocide of Yazidis in Iraq and Syria, but they still refuse to recognize the genocide of Christians who were treated in the same way. We will never express admiration for China's political model. We will not appoint an ambassador whose company led a corporate retreat a few miles from a concentration camp, and we will not let Canada's pension fund invest in surveillance technology in those same concentration camps. Conservatives will restore the Office of Religious Freedom, restore the ambassadorial post, get rid of the values test, and defend the rights of all persecuted minorities, including Christians.
Dan.
The Green Party believes that everyone everywhere has the right to religious freedom unquestionably, and that no one should ever tell anyone else how they should worship or what they have to believe. We think that the best way to stand behind that is to strengthen Canada's role in promoting peace and global cooperation. It's our role here, so it should be our role abroad as well. We think that international stability rests on all nations being able to provide their people with basic needs and security. Again, back to the basic needs. These are articulated in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our commitment is to expanding Canada's international aid, and we think that that will help those facing religious persecution everywhere in the world, and we believe that it is our responsibility to help everyone who's facing that persecution.
Francesco.
Thank you, Dom. I attended Mass this Sunday morning at the the Church of the Good Shepherd, the cathedral, and I go there for the feast days. And my riding has a large number of Iraqi Christians, both Chaldean and Assyrian, and I've gotten to know them very well and understand and have heard their stories of being persecuted in Iraq and as a Christian of the Middle East. I stand with them. I am their advocate, and we must always do more. I go there on the feast days to be with them, and I count them as my friends. We as a government, I'm not going to be partisan on this, but we advocate for the sponsorship of refugees, whether it's privately sponsored refugees to 20,000 by 2020, increase the caps on the sponsorship agreement holders to facilitate more private sponsorships, and double the number of refugees and protected persons. Also, Garnet, in all due respect, the Office of Religious Freedom was an ineffective office. Thank you.
And Matthew, please.
Religious persecution of Christians and other religious minorities across the world is a tragedy that we can do more to address. New Democrats believe that we could be stronger voices for peace and justice on the world stage by participating in peacekeeping, working democratically to end conflicts and persecution, and accepting refugees from places that persecute citizens for their faith, ethnicity, and political participation. But we also have to look domestically. I am very worried by the legislation like Bill 21 in Quebec that is an example of state-sponsored discrimination against religious minorities. When religious minorities are targeted, all of our rights are at risk, and we need to stand in solidarity with our fellow citizens. The best way to protect religious freedom is loud and active political participation in our democratic process to tell lawmakers that you won't stand for the erosion of our human rights. Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about this for a few minutes. Let me start, Garnet, with you. Did you say that your wife's parents are Pakistani Christians?
They were both born in Karachi, yes.
And as I understand it, Christians in Pakistan can face the death penalty if they're considered to be insulting the majority religion. And I'm wondering, is there anything that the Canadian government can do to help Pakistani Christians specifically?
Well, there's a blasphemy law which has perverse outcomes for Christians and other minorities. It's a big problem. The Office of Religious Freedom ran a program in Pakistan, one of many programs around the world, that partnered with the Aga Khan Foundation in the development of pro-pluralism books, trying to engage the education system with materials that would help people think about the role that minorities play in the country's history. These are the kind of actions promoting solidarity. My Liberal colleague says the Office of Religious Freedom was ineffective. I think, with due respect, we need to go beyond words of solidarity to look at the reality of solidarity. The Office of Religious Freedom was only a $5 million office. It ran programs all over the world. It won praise all over the world. Father Deacon Andrew Bennett was so effective in running on-the-ground programs that moved the ball forward in places like Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Pakistan, and a number of countries where the programs weren't even published because they were working behind sort of an iron curtain. So it's very surprising and disappointing to hear Francesco say these negative things about the office, and I look forward to bringing the office back when we're in government.
Now, well, I suppose I should give you a chance to answer that.
Yes.
But not too long.
Two quick points. Canada will always and ever be an outspoken advocate for human rights and call on countries to abide by international standards, and will always be at the table. One thing that's interesting that Garnet hasn't raised is the proposed $2.2 billion cut in foreign aid that Andrew Scheer announced. Now, I'm just going to read a quote, what was stated. Fundamentally, you're talking about immunizing fewer children, more mothers dying in childbirth, less potable water, and more refugees suffering in conflict zones. That is the foreign policy, or proposed foreign policy, of Andrew Scheer. Shame.
I'd love to be able to respond to that.
Well, you've had one turn. If we have time, I'll come back to you. You're next, yeah.
Thank you. I just want to point out to the crowd tonight what you hear and what you don't hear. When my colleague from the Green Party was describing the persecution, he used Christian once, and then he moved on to minorities. Christian was no longer mentioned. When we heard Don saying that in Pakistan, the majority religion persecutes Christians, he didn't want to say Muslim or Islam. The problem is that political correctness is getting in the way of truth, and it's getting in the way of solutions. And we see this again and again in what's happening with the persecution of Christians. Unless we are willing to face these problems and actually say what's going on, we can't move toward solutions. In fact, in that study that I mentioned, the British official who had done the study said that political correctness is actually leading to greater persecution of Christians. We see this in our own country, where Elizabeth May, when interviewed by a reporter, and she's asked, "Who's your hero?" She says, "Jesus Christ." And then she says, "Oh, I apologize. I shouldn't have said that." She said she shouldn't say it because in order to be inclusive, she cannot promote Christianity. What kind of double standard is that? What kind of bizarre idea is it that every other faith can speak its name, but Christianity can't? And this is a problem that not just hurts us here, but hurts Christians worldwide. We need to be able to speak the name of Jesus, we need to be able to speak the name of Christianity, and we need to address these problems head on.
I'm glad that everybody is following my admonition not to applaud during the debate, only at the beginning and the end. Thank you for following the rules. Dan, it's your turn, but I want you to also discuss, you can obviously respond to that, but Bill 21, and Matthew raised it, and he can talk about it after you. Bill 21, it seems to me, is not aimed at Christians particularly, but we're kind of cut in the slipstream. Crucifixes now, you can't wear a crucifix if you're a teacher or so forth. Is this just an increasing secularization of society, maybe aimed at immigrants and Muslims and so forth, but a dangerous way to go?
Interestingly enough, I don't see it as secularization. I actually think that by my definition, secularization would actually be inclusion, and that if somebody chooses to be, they can be, and if somebody chooses to be Catholic or Muslim, they can be. By the way, just to respond to my colleague, one really, really good way to help take care of the Christians that are being persecuted is to increase immigration and let them come here, and we would love to have them. We would welcome them all
indeed,
with open arms.
That is our policy. That is our policy.
As well as any
persecuted
persecuted Muslims
minorities.
and any persecuted Hindus and
Dan
Buddhists
has the floor.
and anyone else. So I actually and the Green Party think that it's important that everybody have equal rights. And see, the interesting thing with the concept of democracy is that in order for us to have the freedom to act the way that we feel we need to act, we have to allow the same thing to other people. Or as they say on the farm, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We need to learn to let people live, and we need to be allowed to live. And I think that needs to be a universal trait for everyone.
Matthew. Bill 21, you alluded to, well, you mentioned it. Do you see it now as sort of an increasing secularization that catches everybody, or is just immigrant? I don't think it's a good idea either way. Let me put that on the record. Even if it's just immigrant aimed, I think that's wrong. But I wonder what you think if there's a wider implication to it.
Well, I think the wider implication is the rise of right-wing populist rhetoric that allows politicians the space to dehumanize people in our public spheres. And we only have to look to how many times the leader of our party, Jagmeet Singh, has been dehumanized for expressing his faith. And so I find it quite ironic to hear the type of right-wing rhetoric that would at one time admonish refugees and at another time talk about religious freedoms. You can't have both. You're either for freedoms for everybody or freedoms for nobody. That's the Canada that I like to live in.
Don, if I can just respond to Francesco's challenge to me, because he hasn't answered my questions, but I want to answer his.
20 seconds.
Okay. Our foreign aid policy is to take money away from countries who don't need it and give more to the countries who need it the most. Now, you don't fight poverty by giving money to countries that are not poor. When our aid dollars end up in Italy and Turkey and Argentina, we want to give more to sub-Saharan Africa. We want to give more to those who are most in need. That is our policy. That is a more compassionate and more effective policy.
I have to give you the same amount of time,
A very quick
and then we're moving on.
A very quick retort. I'm of Canadian of Italian heritage. My parents immigrated from Italy. Under Stephen Harper, when there was an earthquake in Italy, $5 million or so was helped to match donations from the community to rebuild. Are you saying that was an incorrect decision? Under our government, the community raised over $2 million, and an announcement was made to help rebuild Amatrice with some of those funds also given to us from the Canadian government, but matching the community. Are you saying tonight to the Italian community, the 1.5 million, 6 million Canadians of Italian heritage, it was wrong for the community to go out and raise money for affected areas, it was wrong for Stephen Harper to provide a matching donation, and it was wrong for our government to do the same thing when our community helped out back home? Was it wrong? Yes or no?
Francesco, I'm happy to answer your
I'll
question
let you
again.
answer, just quickly.
Happy to answer it again. Let me be very clear that there are certain categories of spending which Andrew Scheer was very clear we would continue to consider proposals from all over the world, including proposals promoting pluralism and democracy, and there's uncoded categories in there. So absolutely there's nothing wrong with fundraising, and absolutely the government should be engaged in things like disaster relief. But when we have coded grants directly to countries that are already doing relatively well, let's use that money to help those who are actually the world's poorest. That is, using your head and your heart at the same time.